A gloved hand brushed fresh stone dust from beneath the gargoyle and exposed a new sigil carved into the ledge. Suspicion tightened Elias' morose jaw. He tapped the edge of his leather notebook twice before he spoke. "Henry, there is fresh tooling here." Elias, voice low and precise. Warden Henry's lantern swung toward the mark, and he answered without looking up. "Restoration, due to Marrow." Nothing more. The exchange landed like a challenge. A physical discovery, a denial, and an urgent choice to press further. Elias had come to the cathedral that evening to check mortar and water stains, not to argue with the warden. He kept his posture slightly stooped from years bent over folios and scaffolding. The blazer over his dark wool vest smelled faintly of beeswax. His round spectacles caught the lamplight, and he held the brass lapel pin as if it steadied him. The central problem presented itself plainly. A new sigil suggested intentional intervention at a place meant to be ancient and immutable. And someone inside the cathedral insisted the mark belonged to conservation rather than to intentional occult insertion. That disagreement threatened the cathedral's authority and Elias' goal of assembling evidence. Elias leaned over the gutter, wiped rain grit from the carved stone, and traced the sigil with a fingertip. The cut was recent. Tool marks flared under the candle hallow. He smelled wet stone and a residue of lime mortar. "Henry." Elias again, quieter. "This is not modern tooling. The chisel stroke matches 16th century masonry work I catalogued last year." He set his notebook on the ledge, opened to a page of sketches, and began to draw the same shallow arc he could see in the sigil. The gesture anchored him. Suspicion drove him to act. Confirm date, record angle, and secure witnesses. Henry straightened, boots clacking on the scaffolding. He had the warden's broad shoulders and a voice that carried an administrative finality. "Due to Marrow, Henry, I order you not to make these accusations publicly. The bishop signed off on necessary imagery long ago. We keep the stone. We do not spread unrest." Sister Aveline's steps came from below. The archive's lanterns were visible in the nave windows. Elias watched Henry's jaw. When Henry's mouth tightened, Elias felt the second emotional shift, doubt seep into the exchange. He had to choose whether to escalate by force or to cultivate a quieter path. They moved down into the cathedral interior together. The leaden air inside the nave magnified small sounds. A rope's creak, the scrape of boot soles, the distant drip of water from a carved gargoyle. Sister Aveline awaited them at the archive vestibule with a folio cradled to her chest. "Due to Marrow," she said, naming him as if that alone conferred a measure of safety. She carried a single illuminated leaf and set it on the table. The manuscript lay open, marginal demons looping between Latin script. She pushed it forward without ceremony. "I thought you should see this," she said. Sister Aveline spoke plainly. Her habit hung in the charcoal tones of the cathedral's shadows, and the candlelight touched her face with hard clarity. Her fingers trembled when she turned the leaf. Elias recognized certain pigments, lapis faint in the robes, lead white dulled with age, and his hands moved to inspect the margins for later alterations. The manuscript contained a craftsman's note, written in a cramped hand, that referenced figures placed for fear and instruction. Elias read the line aloud. "Figures placed for fear and instruction," he repeated, and the phrase shifted their conversation from conservation to intent. Master Corbin joined them within minutes, carrying tools and a portable lamp. He had the slow, deliberate movements of a conservator who had restored oak and vellum for decades. Elias listened as Corbin described the palimpsest traces he had noticed last month. "Under ultraviolet light, under the paint, there are lines of a demon form, Corbin, eyes in the margins. Someone painted over them but left the outline. Whoever did that wanted the image to survive, not to vanish." Corbin's description produced the next emotion shift for Elias. Fear edged into his working calm. The fear showed in how Elias tightened his grip on the notebook and paused longer between observational notes. Corbin began the careful scraping on the conservation table with steady hands. He explained each motion aloud so that no assumption could hide under silence. We will use saline solution lightly, then soft scalpel strokes at the pigment edge, Corbin. We document every shaving. Elias moved to hold the lamp, watching the ultraviolet reveal darker underdrawing. The demonic underpainting slithered from shadow like a negative printed beneath the later surface. The image itself contained a hybrid figure. Goat limbs, a human torso obscured by draping, a face half, obscured by soot and later retouching. Someone had not only painted fear, but had engineered its concealment. Warden Henry arrived at the archive door with a measured knock and a faster temper. "UUD, stay out of sealed spaces. Dra. Marrow, Henry, addressing Elias directly, you are making accusations that will unsettle the parish. The bishop prefers certain pedagogical terror. It has order. It has precedent." Elias put his hand flat on the illuminated leaf and met Henry's gaze. He felt the internal engine of the chapter reorient, from suspicion to doubt and now to confrontation. He spoke with the deliberate cadence of a scholar who had to make a persuasive record. "Henry, this is not ordinary pedagogy. The craftsman's note names ritual intent. Corbin found underpainting. Sister Aveline can attest to this folio's provenance." The line of dialogue pulled the group into a quick, close negotiation. Henry's voice rose. "You accuse the bishop's office of commissioning terror. You will inflame the congregation. You will endanger donors and the cathedral's standing." The confrontation continued for several fast exchanges. "Henry, listen. Elias, you and I both know what these images do. We catalogue them because we believe they teach. But a note that names ritual intent changes the purpose. The note could be symbolic." Henry shot back. Corbin found tooling matches and layered paint that dates earlier than the overpaint. "Elias, we have to test the pigments before we conclude." The argument went through 3 quick volleys, each line short, each name repeated to anchor the listener. The dialogue fulfilled the requirement for rapid back and forth and clarified stakes. Preservation versus disclosure. Corbin announced a new discovery mid-argument. Under ultraviolet, a thin, erased cipher traced the manuscript margin. Master Corbin held up a strip of vellum where faint ink had not been fully removed. "These marks are a cipher. Corbin, not simple marginalia. There's a pattern in the way the demons are placed, and in these letters, initials and tolly marks, that external event served as a mid-chapter pivot and deepened the mystery." Elias felt the shift to a blend of alarm and methodical focus. He instructed Corbin to photograph the cipher and to transcribe every visible stroke. His hands moved briskly, fingers tapping the notebook edge, an action he relied on when he needed to think. They found a torn slip hidden inside the coilecton's cavity later that night. Elias pulled the cavity open with a flat hand and a small crowbar. The slip had been folded twice. Sister Aveline read aloud, ordered by the chapter to install admonitory figures. Craftsmen paid with altar candles and grain. Purpose: to instruct by fear. The sentence was concrete and damning. Elias felt a fresh surge of energy, resolve, and then an immediate hesitation. Exposing the paper could fracture the cathedral's social order. He flipped through his notebook and wrote the exact wording. He recorded who had handled the slip, the time, and the way the paper crumbled at the edges. A new complication arrived when Henry produced a vellum receipt, he said, dated the bishop's sanction. He pressed the receipt across the table and said, "See. The bishop's seal is here. The imagery is permitted when deemed didactic." Elias scanned the seal. It matched known episcopal stamps, but the shorthand in the craftsman's note suggested local commissioning practices that bypassed public registers. The twist altered Elias' understanding. The bishop's sanction might have been real but practical, and local craftsmen were paid in kind for work intended to terrify or instruct. The relationship between authority and artisans acquired a layered motive. They argued again at the archive vestibule. The conversation turned from facts to institutional power. Sister Aveline's voice cut through. "Henry, you cannot stop investigation by saying we preserve order. We are caretakers of truth as well as stone. Her tone was steady. She named both men as she spoke. Henry bristled and responded, Sister Aveline, you are new to ledger management. You do not understand the consequences. The exchange escalated into a brief, 3-line argument where tempers flared and names were repeated to keep the dialogue clear. Night edged toward dawn. The team found themselves at the sealed side chapel, where a door with an iron latch had been bolted for decades. The decision point arrived. Unseal it or leave the matter buried. Elias felt the moral crossroad in the way his hands hesitated on the latch. He watched Sister Aveline and Master Corbin reading each other's faces for the same question. Reveal and risk scandal, or conceal and preserve institutional safety. Elias raised his hand and placed it on the bolt. He made the choice to unseal. They pried open the chapel slowly. The hinges cried. A thin layer of soot and centuries of candle soot lifted into the light as the door moved. Inside, half-effaced saints lined the walls. Votive niches contained melted candle stubs. On the altar, a hybrid demonic figure faced outward, half obscured by votive soot and a small ritual object placed before it, a carved token encrusted with wax. Master Corbin stepped forward, holding his lamp steady, and described the altarpiece as Elias sketched its visible elements into the notebook. This was the climax beat. The sealed chapel revealed a deliberate altar arrangement where iconography and an object together suggested ongoing ritualized purpose. Warden Henry lunged forward and caught the chapel door. "You cannot open this!" Henry, voice raw. He shoved his shoulder into the jamb and tried to force the door back closed. Sister Aveline stepped between Henry and the altar and said, "Henry, stop, let us document it. Let dear Marrow record what we find." Corbin's lamp trembled as he adjusted its angle. The confrontation became physical for a moment. Henry's body blocked the light. Sister Aveline's fingers clenched on the altar rail. The group traded 6 short, rapid lines of speech in which demands and refusals collided. Elias recorded each spoken assertion in shortened, fingers moving faster. Henry tried to take the ritual token from the altar with a gloved hand. Elias moved to intercept and caught Henry's wrist. "Henry, don't touch it, Elias." The physical contact tightened the scene. Both men felt the strain on their joints and their authority. Henry yanked his hand away and barked, "You will be the one blamed when the congregation hears of this." The token slipped slightly and a smear of wax left a finger mark. Elias photographed the smudge with his portable camera, a deliberate action that converted an accusation into evidence. Sister Aveline closed her eyes for a half-second, breathed, and said, "We document. We do not destroy." She took the token with Corbin's assistance and wrapped it in linen. Her hands moved with the care of someone who understood both liturgy and risk. That careful behavior changed the emotional tone in the room, from raw confrontation to controlled sorting and preservation. Elias felt the final emotion of the chapter, a guarded determination. He instructed Corbin to secure the token in a conservation crate and to seal the chapel temporarily until they could present the findings to a scholarly review board. They did not leave immediately. Dawn seeping through the clerestory painted the floor with narrow beams. Elias sat at the archive table with the illuminated folio open, the torn slip beside it, and the photographs spread like evidence. He recorded the coordinates of the chapel, the measurements of the sigil, and the sequence of who had been present. He wrote down a line he later kept to himself, a notation describing details of the altarpiece that he would not publish. He made that with holding a choice. Protect the fragile community from panic while preserving the record for further, quiet inquiry. Sister Aveline folded the linen, wrapped token and handed the small package to Elias. "Keep this safe, due to Marrow," she said. Elias placed the token in his satchel, feeling the weight of the object against old leather. He closed the ledger and let his fingers pause on the cover. He had decided to document and to limit public exposure, and the decision was concrete. He would file a formal account with selected scholars and keep the most inflammatory image off public channels. He slid the sealed chapel's key onto the table and set it under a small stack of ledgers. Corbin began the conservation notes for the manuscript and scheduled pigment tests. Henry insisted on drafting a sanitized statement for the bishop's review that omitted the ritual wording. The team divided tasks by name and by expertise. Names clustered in the record. Elias noted their voices and choices carefully. He left orders to photograph the altarpiece under controlled light when the next conservation window opened. The chapter's twist, the craftsman's payment terms and the bishop's ambiguous sanction altered the direction of the inquiry and forced Elias to plan methodically. Before he left the archive, Elias lit a single beeswax candle and set it near the folio. He looked at the marginal demons once more, noting the exact angle of their gaze and the smudge pattern where soot had been wiped. He thought of the craftsman's note, paid in candles and grain, installed to instruct by fear. The physical details remained. The chalky pigment edge, the diagonal cut of the chisel, the linen-wrapped token cool against his palm. Elias recorded a final line in his notebook and closed it. They partially sealed the chapel at dawn. Corbin fastened the iron bolt and placed the photographs beneath a loose flagstone for safekeeping. Sister Aveline and Elias exchanged a few practical lines about catalogue numbers and times. Henry returned to his rounds, saying the cathedral would manage the matter discreetly. Elias felt steadier but wary. He had exposed the first secret. Stone and ink had been used as instruments of instruction and controlled fear. He had evidence now, but he had also chosen restraint. His final act in the chapter was simple and concrete. He placed the linen, wrapped token into his satchel, closed the satchel's flap, and locked the brass clasp with his signet ring. The chapter ends with that locked clasp lying warm against Elias's palm, the key to the chapel left on the table, and the ledger opened to a new page labeled with date and time. He would take the documented facts to trusted colleagues, but he would not publish the most damning image. He had resolved the immediate conflict. The sealed chapel had been opened, the tokens secured, the manuscript noted, and the cathedral's authority appeased for now. The next steps would be quieter, measured, and deliberate, beginning from this concrete record sealed in his satchel. A loose folio fell from its binding and slapped open on the sacristy table, exposing fresh marginal demons and a carved sigil that matched the gargoyle's new tooling. Suspicion tightened Elias Marrow's jaw before he lifted his spectacles. He tapped the notebook edge twice and shifted the candle so the ink glinted. Conservator Marta froze with one glove half off, the linen between her fingers white at the knuckle. The folios worm-eaten margin bore thin, retouching lines, and a stamped sigil identical to the one found beneath the gargoyle ledge 2 nights earlier. Elias spoke before the sacristy silence could settle. Marta, who handled this codex in transit, he asked. Marta answered in short, measured words, "I signed the receipt." Toomer's moved volumes yesterday. The sentence landed like a step on wet stone. A practical, archival question became itself evidence. If the sigil appeared on both manuscript and stone, someone had been altering sacred surfaces. Within those first minutes, suspicion became the engine of every choice Elias made. Elias moved his hand across the folio's open page and pointed. Look at the ink. See the sheen on the strokes. Marta leaned close. Eyes on the letters. That varnish is modern, she said. I can test it in the vault. It won't take long. Their voices were low. The folio lay between them like a minor altar whose image threatened to rearrange relationships inside the cathedral. Elias's background in iconography mattered now. He did not make broad claims. He identified patterns and asked precise questions. Within 5 sentences the stakes were visible. Someone had deliberately inserted matching sigils into both manuscript and stone. That action threatened the cathedral's authority because images here were tools of instruction and control. Elias understood the social mechanics of those images. He also knew what it meant if caretakers had begun to use fear as a device beyond sanctioned liturgy. They moved fast. Marta wrapped the folio in acid-free paper while Elias fetched his brass lapel pin and notebook. The practical motions, careful folds, the faint crinkle of paper. Elias, closing the notebook with a soft snap, kept their hands busy and their minds focused. Acolyte Thomas arrived with a lamp and a tired expression, breath wet from the night air. I moved the cart, yes. I didn't touch this one. Thomas' words were short, but his hands betrayed him. He wiped them on his cassock before the group could register it. Elias Thomas to retrace his steps. Thomas named rooms, a sequence of shelves, a clean table, the vestry doorway. He added, Sister Beatrice passed behind the high altar the night before last. I thought she was carrying votives. Marta looked at Elias and said, We must check the vault stitching and inks. The conversation tightened. The first emotion shift arrived here. Suspicion shifted to doubt. Thomas' account introduced new possibilities and redirected blame away from simple negligence. They carried the folio to the nave and then to the archive vault. A locked iron door shut behind them with a metallic clack. Marta laid the folio on the vault table under a lamplight that picked out the varnish's unnatural gloss. She sampled a scrap of thread from the binding with tweezers and set a drop of solvent. This is not oak, gall, she said. This is synthetic. Recent. Elias read the margin aloud, word by word, because the script itself contained a short prayer twisted into an obscene flourish. It reads like instruction disguised as admonition, he said. His voice remained calm, but the cadence tightened. A new external event occurred. Henry's lantern, which had hung in the corridor, clattered as someone set it down in haste. Henry entered and his face closed when he saw the folio. What is this? Henry demanded. His tone was defensive. Elias answered quickly, Warden Henry, this folio bears a sigil matching the recent tooling beneath the gargoyle. Henry's hand went to his pocket, where the signet ring usually sat. He did not speak for a moment and then said, I lit the brazier last night and disturbed a bunch of soot. I might have rubbed some marks off. I didn't carve anything. The second emotion shift moved from doubt to guarded accusation. Elias watched Henry's jaw. He saw the ringed fingerprint impression at the edge of the old soot stain in his notebook's photograph from the earlier inspection. Elias, Henry, where did you find that soot? Henry's answer was clipped, outside under the buttress. I burned some herbs to drive the rats away. Marta's fingers found a burned splinter in the folio's cover and matched the char to a few blackened fragments in her open box. Those herbs are frankincense and rue. Marta, they burn at low heat and leave a specific resinous blackness. The group exchanged looks. The mix of burnt herbs and a modern varnish shifted fear into a precise suspicion. Someone had performed deliberate ritual actions near the gargoyle perch and then altered book margins. They returned to the buttress the next hour, while rain still skittered from the arch. Elias climbed carefully to the ledge with Thomas and Henry trailing. The stone was slick. Elias's glove scraped a fresh tool mark into the mortar where the gargoyle's wing joined the ledge. He found a faint loop of a sigil and, pressed into the soot, a partial fingerprint ringed by a smear of resin. Henry, I disturbed it. I burned the herbs to hide tracks. Elias looked at Henry and said, Why did you want to hide the tracks? Henry's voice shortened, because people would panic, he said. I didn't want the bishop involved. That answer redirected the group's emotional energy. Guarded accusation tipped toward betrayal. Back in the vault, Marta ran a quick chromatography on the ink. Acolyte Thomas hovered and watched the machinist's paper spool. You moved anything else, Thomas? Elias. Thomas swallowed and said, I put books on the north table for cleaning. I didn't retouch anything. The spool's strip showed a polymer compound used in modern conservation materials mixed with pigments not standard to medieval workshops. Marta, this is retouching done with modern paint and then varnished. Someone wanted the image to look older than it is. Thomas' face went pale. I saw Sister Beatrice at odd hours. She knelt alone by the choir some nights. The group paused. The second external event in the vault was Thomas' new claim, which shifted suspicion outward toward clergy. Elias confronted Sister Beatrice in the vestry after the matins bell. She wore her habit and moved like someone used to ritual timing. She responded to Elias with precise sentences. Due to Marrow, I arrange devotions for the infirm. I have used striking images to warn the parishioners. Elias, Beatrice, did you alter manuscripts or stonework? Beatrice, no. I draw stark pictures on slips and place them for those who need admonition. Fear can teach. The exchange became a clash of intent and method. Martyr, sister, did you ever authorize anyone to rework images? Beatrice hesitated and then said, not in writing. But sometimes the wardens act to preserve order. The conversation suggested a network of tacit approvals that allowed more aggressive measures. The third external event. Beatrice's partial confession changed the shape of blame. Tension rose as the group assembled at dawn beneath the altarpiece where the vault key hung. Elias recited the findings. The folio with new marginal demons, modern varnish, burned herb traces, and a fingerprint matched to a ring Henry wore. We have to check behind the altarpiece. If there is a hidden compartment, it will hold the answer. Henry's face went white, and he said, you cannot. But Elias and Martha had already felt the wood panel. Thomas produced a crowbar. They worked in controlled motions until the nailed seam gave with an angry sigh. The climax arrived when the panel swung back and revealed a small niche stocked with a miniature ritual tableau. A stitched folio, a set of charred votive candles, a brass thimble, and a wooden token bearing the same sigil. Marta's gloved hand lifted the folio. She opened it and found marginalia with the same recent retouching, and a burnt edge folded into a small square. Elias compared the fingerprint smudge on the token base to a photograph in his notebook of Henry's signet. The match was unmistakable. Henry faltered and then lashed out. You accuse me. I guard this place. A rapid exchange followed. Henry, your ring left that print. Elias, Henry, stop. Henry shot back. Do you think I carved demons? Elias replied, we found your suit and your ring on the buttress. You burned herbs to hide it. Henry's voice rose. You bind me by implication. Thomas, Henry, I saw you near the buttress the night we closed early. That produced 3 quick back and forth lines, each short, each aimed like a chisel. The confrontation was physical. Henry's hand flexed at his hip. Marta slid the folio into archival paper with firm motions. Thomas paled and kept glancing at the doorway. Henry's response shifted the emotional current again. His anger softened into a terse admission. I went out there. I did not carve. I found the token and I hid it because I thought someone was using it to frighten worshippers. I burned herbs to erase traces because I feared scandal. He spoke in clipped sentences that showed a man making a practical but culpable choice to conceal rather than report. Elias, who gave you leave to decide? Henry's voice broke on the word, decide, and then he said, the prior is ill. I thought I protected the flock. That answer reframed the problem. This was not a solitary act of vandalism, but a set of improvised measures taken by custodians and clergy to shape belief at the ground level. Elias ordered the items into sealed bags and photographed everything. Marta inventoried the stitched folio. Marginal demons, modern retouching, and short notes written in a hurried hand that mixed Latin invocations with a parish register of names. Thomas pointed to a name. Bernard, Gardner, Ollis, Bell Ringer, and Sister Beatrice's initials. Beatrice had been implicated in the document's circulation. She denied purposeful occult rites, but her initials against a list of parishioners who had received admonitory slips suggested a distribution channel. The twist here changed their understanding of an earlier event. The frightened votive slips Beatrice admitted placing were not isolated moral warnings, but part of a coordinated pattern involving caretakers and some clergy. They argued in low tones across the vault table. Thomas, I never signed anything. I only moved books. Marta, you moved them into areas where they could be retouched. Elias, who benefits from imposing fear. Beatrice answered, authority. Order. Obedience, the conversation became a sequence of short exchanges that revealed motive and misstep. "Henry, I wanted control, not ritual," Marta corrected him. "Control became ritual when you burned herbs and hid evidence." The argument produced a small cascade of admissions and denials. That cascade served as the chapter's mini cliffhanger. The group discovered the folio included a list of specific parishioners and dates that matched recent unusual confessions. Someone in the cathedral had been engineering fear to influence behavior. Elias felt the shape of choices tighten. He recognized the social logic. Images and ritual operate as governance inside a community. The group, we must secure the dangerous items and keep this contained until we understand the network. Thomas looked at Elias and said, "What about the bishop?" Elias answered, "Not yet. Panic will spread if the bishop is briefed without evidence." The group reached an uneasy pact. Marta would catalogue and conceal the most incendiary folios. Thomas would monitor access to the stacks. Beatrice would step back from distributing admonitory slips. Henry would submit his key and remain under supervision. In the vault's final moments before dawn, Elias placed the stitched folio into a locked chest and keyed the latch. He closed the chest with a measured motion that was itself a decision. Marta sealed the folio's wrapping with archival tape. Thomas set a simple salt circle on the small table, an old habit, he said, learned from his grandmother, then laughed nervously and wiped his palms on his cassock. The group's emotional tone settled into cautious resolve. They had resolved the immediate question of culpability for the compartment and the fingerprints, but the larger network remained opaque. Elias left the vault carrying his notebook. He reviewed the day's sequence out loud while they walked the nave to reset the votive stands. We found a method, an object, and an apparatus for distribution." He paused and then said, "We also found a list of names. Someone is targeting specific parishioners," Marta added. "Those names match confessions taken in the last 2 months. Beatrice touched her rosary and said, "I did not know it would be used this way." Her voice was plain and short. The final external event of the chapter arrived when a soft metallic scrape echoed from the corridor. The Archbishop's steward had come for the morning deliveries earlier than usual. They carried the sealed chest into the archive vault and placed it beneath a stack of mundane ledgers. "Elias, we will hide the chest, but we will not destroy the contents." Marta nodded and said, "We preserve evidence, Elias." "That is all." Thomas stood by the door and watched the corridor for movement. Henry returned the warden's key and set it on the vault table. He did so with a hand that trembled, then steadied. "I will answer for what I did," he said. The sentence was a concrete decision that closed the chapter's immediate conflict. Elias wrote a single note in his leather notebook. Catalog items removed, suspected participants, next steps. He folded the note and slid it into his inner pocket. The chapter ended with a concrete situational beat. As dawn lit the stained, glass faces, Henry's footfalls retreated down the cloister and someone knocked once at the vestry door. The knock was sharp and persistent. Marta looked at Elias and said, "Who could be up this early?" Elias set his spectacles and answered, "We checked the door together." He opened it with Marta at his side and Thomas behind them. And they found the corridor empty save for a wet shoe print leading away toward the choir. The shoe mark matched one of the names on the stitched folio. That trace turned the contained discovery into a promised investigation and set the stage for the next chapter. Emotion root, suspicion, emotion shifts, suspicion, doubt, accusation, betrayal, guarded confession, resolve. A painted demon's jaw unlatched and a narrow wooden panel slid open beneath the altarpiece as the last candle guttered. Suspicion tightened Elias' morose jaw. He crouched behind the choir stall with his notebook pressed to his ribs and watched the painted hybrid shift its posture. Warden Henry's breath came in small, even huffs beside him. The altar was moving and the stakes were no longer theory. Suspicion drives Elias forward. He cannot leave a known deception to spread into mass fear. that suspicion had guided him since the carved sigil under the gargoyle and the loose folio that fell open in the sacristy. He touched his spectacles, felt the thin scar along his brow, and measured himself for action. They had arrived at the choir an hour before midnight. Elias had not planned to witness an enactment. He came to confirm pigments and catalogue the marginalia that matched the gargoyle tooling. He had counted the same cipher in margin ink and stone. Now, in the shadow of the ark, he watched Prior Lucian and Sister Magdalena arrange candles in a pattern that repeated the painted demon's gestures. Elias shifted his weight and felt the leather of his satchel rub against his hip. "Henry, those candles," Elias whispered. "They align with the painted figures." Henry answered with a low sound. He did not use Elias' last name. He knew better than to speak loudly here. The first external action arrived as Henry extended a gloved hand and brushed dust from beneath the gargoyle during a contrived pause outside the nave earlier that week. A discovery Elias had written down in the margin of his field notebook. Elias had felt that prior scraping of stone as proof. Now the proof reappeared as coordinated motion. Prior Lucian crossed himself deliberately and reached toward the altarpiece. Sister Magdalena's fingers trembled as she placed the final taper. The altar's painted mouth opened on a tiny hinge. The congregation beyond the screen would have called it a miracle. Elias felt a second emotion shift. From suspicion to urgent dread, he leaned forward. His fingers found the edge of the choir rail and tightened. After the altar moved, Elias' next thought was precise. He must force admission. He could not allow the altar's mechanism to be staged unexamined. The choice to confront arrived without fanfare. In the sacristy, lamp oil hissed in a small pool as Prior Lucian closed the wooden door. Elias blocked it with his shoulder. "Prior Lucian." "Elias, explain the mechanism. You used the image to move people." Lucian's reply came with a brittle laugh. "Elias, you are an art man, not a judge. Lucian, do you not see what this does for the flock?" His voice tightened only at the end. Warden Henry remained by the doorway and crossed his arms. "Henry, you saw them at the choir. Elias, you saw the candles and the hinge." Henry's jaw worked. He did not answer at once. Elias watched his face for a sign of the earlier gloved hand discovery. Henry's fingers moved to the lantern and back, small, controlling motions that showed inner pressure. That pressure became an emotional shift in Elias, from urgent dread to cold interrogation. He tapped his notebook twice with a fingernail, the motion he made when about to present a claim. "We used art to keep order," Lucian admitted finally. But he did not sound repentant. "The city teeters on panic after the fire. People need signs they can read." Elias stepped closer, signs that show demons and open reliquaries. "You stage fear as a lesson." Lucian's gaze slid away. "You call it lesson. I call it salvation." Elias. Magistrate Armand approves of convincing spectacle. The chapter decided. Henry's eyes flicked to the sacristy window. The admission widened the case. A civic hand, not only a clerical one, sanctioned the use of the altarpiece. Elias felt the second required twist. A subtle revelation that changed his understanding of the actors involved. This was not a single rogue priest. It had civic reach. Elias left the sacristy with the feeling of cold metal at the base of his skull. He met Matraz Bastien at the archway to the illuminator's workshop under the nave. The workshop smelled of boiled glue and linseed oil. The floor bore flecks of ochre. Bastien's hands were stained. He wiped them on his apron when Elias about hidden compartments. "Do you deny it, Matre?" Elias demanded. Bastien folded his hands, then relaxed them on the bench. "De Marrow, the panel was always part of the frame. It conceals relics. We layered pigments and secret notations to cue movement." His voice was steady. "We wrote marks that matched the marginal demon's gestures to liturgical cues." Elias nodded and tapped his notebook twice. The workshop supplied the confirmatory mechanics, a second external event, the opening of panels and the discovery of bone relics and coded notation. He catalogued the evidence aloud to Henry. Henry's reaction held a different register. He paced once, then stopped near a window and stared at the buttress, where the gargoyle wore fresh tooling. Henry, remember the new tooling under the gargoyle. Elias, it matches the folio S sigil. Henry's face shuttered. I found fresh chisel work 2 nights ago. I thought it was vandalism. I didn't think the chapter would. His voice cut off. The admission exposed the wider network Elias feared. Henry's hands clutched at the lantern chain. His knuckles whitened. Through Henry's small, taut movements, Elias read fear and loyalty pulling at one another. This was an emotional shift for Henry, from concern to conflicted compliance. They pried the altarpiece panels open at dawn in the archives beneath the nave. Fingers scraped centuries of dust and revealed layered pigments, secret notations carved into the frame, and a small reliquary box tucked into a dovetailed cavity. Matraz Bastien handled the relic with a pair of cotton gloves, a bone and a lock of hair, as Bastien said quietly, placed inside to ensure presence. His use of quotation marks in speech implied contempt for the rhetoric the chapter used. Elias read the encoded notation and traced the mapping that paired marginal demons with liturgical cues. He traced a line in his notebook, then tapped the page edge. The mapping showed the art to be a program. Turn a painted demon this way, recite this verse, move this candle, and the mechanism will reveal the reliquary. The implication arrived like cold iron. The altarpiece was an instrument designed to manipulate perception. Sister Magdalena appeared at the workshop door before dawn, her hands folded over her chest. She kept her scarf around her neck despite the heat of the lamps. Sister Magdalena, Elias, why did you do it? She lowered her eyes and held out a trembling hand that clutched a rosary bead. Elias, listen to me, she replied. We were desperate. Mothers came to me with fevered hands. Children were lost in the market after the fire. The magistrate said spectacle would bring them back to order. Her voice broke once. Henry stepped closer. Magistrate Armand argued for a public show to calm the square. Henry, Prior Lucian, it would stop rumors of the malison. He promised resources if the chapter would oblige. The conversation moved rapidly into a negotiation of motives. Elias could feel his own pulse behind his teeth. He sharply, so you admit it was for control. Magdalena nodded and exhaled. We feared riots. We feared worse. We chose containment over chaos. Her hands tightened on the rosary so hard that a bead cracked. Elias registered that crack as a physical sign of moral pressure. He did not allow himself to speak comfort. Magistrate Armand came to the chapter house at noon with canon members in tow. He spoke with the blunt cadence of a man used to directing markets and courts. Prior Lucian, Armand, the city will pay for stability. You will stage a spectacle. The people will see the reliquary. They will follow the chapter's guidance and stop the fires of rumor. Prior Lucian answered with a measured tone. Magistrate Armand, the chapter acts to protect the flock. Armand cut him off with a tight smile. Protecting the flock sometimes requires sharp hands. Henry watched Armand closely and then looked at Elias. Elias found that Armand's presence codified the bargain. The civic authority had not only approved the mechanism, it demanded its use. Elias recognized a moral trade-off that tore at Sister Magdalena's earlier confession. Protection purchased with manipulation. They set the mass in motion that afternoon to quell unrest in the market. The nave filled faster than it should have for a weekday. Merchants and families pressed into the pews. The bell tolled with a dull clang. Elias took a place in the back with his notebook open. He watched Prior Lucian raise the host and the congregation respond. The painted demon moved, the wooden jaw unlatched and revealed the reliquary. A murmur ran through the crowd and rose into a cry. People made the sign of the cross. Some began to weep. Elias could see a woman near the front clap her hands and point. He felt a physical urge to step forward and stop the mechanism. Elias lunged as the panel opened wider. He pushed through 2 rows of startled pews and reached the rail. Stop it, he called. His voice did not carry far. A hand seized his sleeve. Elias. No, Henry, but the grip was weak. Prior Lucian hesitated for a fraction of a breath, and then signaled the chantry. The reliquary rose, its lid catching the light. A child shrieked behind Elias. The congregation surged forward as if something magnetic had pulled them. The altar, which had been a painted warning, became an active agent. In those moments, Elias experienced the chapter summit. The altar's purpose exposed and the mass devolving into frightened cars. This was the climax the investigation had been building toward. The altar's mechanism performed its intended social work. It terrorized and then guided. After the mass, arrests and bargaining began in quick succession. Magistrate Armand met Matraz Bastien in a corridor and offered terms with a small, businesslike smile. "Bastien, the city will make payments and you will keep the frame intact. Armand, no scandal, no prosecutions." The chapter continues its work. Bastien's face hardened. "And the honesty of our craft?" Bastien asked. "You mean the city needs quiet?" Armand replied. Henry and Elias detained Sister Magdalena in the crypt to question her more rigorously. Magdalena's face had gone pale. She apologized with small, concrete actions. She folded and refolded her hands, tapped a bead, and lowered her head. The magistrate's bargain offered Elias a choice. Armand approached him in the chapter house corridors and laid out the civic argument plainly. "Dr. Marrow, expose this and you will break the chapter's authority and risk riots. Accept silence and the city will avoid blood in the streets." Armand's tone measured risk and cost in a ledger. Elias felt a moral pressure compress his options. He thought of the children in the market and the woman who pointed at the reliquary during the mass. Elias's fingers hovered above his notebook. He understood the consequences of either path. The decision could save lives or preserve a manipulative instrument. He had been guided by suspicion, then dread, then interrogation. Now he teetered on resolve. Elias chose neither immediate exposure nor quiet containment. He forced a middle road. He confronted Matraz Bastien and Prior Lucian together in a small, echoing room off the chapter house. "You made this instrument, Elias. You will dismantle the mechanism and disclose its workings to a neutral council composed of guild elders and civic scribes. You will allow inspection and a record will be made public." Lucian protested. "Elias, that would ruin the chapter's authority." "The chapter's authority is built on a lie," Elias replied. Henry added, "We will keep the city from erupting while the investigation proceeds. But we cannot let this repeat." There were 3 rapid, clipped lines exchanged then. Lucian objected. Armand's emissary warned. Bastien raised his voice and then lowered it. The vocal exchange met the requirement for quick back and forth argument. Lucian's voice shook once. "You will force us into a public humiliation that will leave our flock leaderless," he said. Elias did not answer with rhetoric. He listed evidence. The mapping notation, the bone relic, the matching tooling under the gargoyle. Their faces tightened in distinct ways. Bastien with wounded pride, Lucian with fear for his position, Henry with a practical resolve. The chapter accepted a fragile public record. The magistrate grunted and allowed the inspection with conditions. He left with a warning in his smile. Sister Magdalena, detained but not prosecuted, admitted more in private. We were buying time," she said. "We ourselves that small deception would stop large harm." Her hands shook as she spoke. She described mothers pressing with fevered fingers and merchants threatening to walk away. Elias of the day, she placed the first candle in the pattern and watched a panicked merchant drop his bundle and kneel. That concrete memory, one market moment, stayed with Elias. He wrote it down. The confession did not absolve her. Instead, it deepened Elias's sense of the moral calculus the chapter had chosen. They implemented oversight slowly. A guild of scribes inspected the notation. A civic panel recorded testimony. The altarpiece was sealed for repair while the public record was drawn. Matraz Bastien argued for conservation protocols. Prior Lucian argued the reliquary had historic merit. Elias oversaw the cataloguing of pigments and the removal of the reliquary to a secure chest. When the reliquary left the chapel, a small crowd gathered at the chapter house steps to see the procession. Some crossed themselves. Others muttered about deceit. Elias felt a tightness in his chest and then a steadying shift. From dread toward a professional clarity. He had not chosen theta. He had chosen procedure. Afterward, at dusk, in the crypt where cold stone gathered, Elias and Henry confronted Maitre as Bastien one final time. Sebastian, Elias, you made a tool of your craft. Sebastian's reply was flat. I painted what the patrons asked. I hid the hinge as woodworkers hide mortise. I do not decide how others use it. Henry stepped forward. You are responsible for the mechanical choices. Maitre. Sebastian lowered his head and rubbed his temple. He admitted, in a spare voice, that he had signed the frame because the chapter offered funds to restore the workshop and provide work for apprentices. His confession placed economic pressure as a motive. Elias felt an emotional shift in the room, from accusation to a grim accounting of survival choices. Each man in that room had compromised for reasons he considered urgent. In the final hours of the day, Elias climbed the rain, slick buttress alone, toward the gargoyle that had started this chain of inquiry. Clouds broke and spat small cold beads. The stone under his gloves gave a faint powder when he scraped it. He traced the new tooling mark beneath the gargoyle swing with a thumb. The mark matched the notation from the altarpiece and the marginalia he had catalogued earlier. He found a sliver of carved stone lodged in a seam of the buttress and slid it into his palm. The sliver fit with the other evidence like a metal key in a lock. He felt a low, steady heartbeat in his wrists. His decision was concrete. He did not speak to himself about destiny. He pressed the brass lapel pin into his palm and rolled it once between fingers. The pin's engraved cipher matched the notation in his notebook. He walked down from the buttress with the sliver and the pin in his pocket. He had resolved the immediate conflict. The mechanism would be catalogued, the reliquary secured, and the chapter placed under civic oversight. He had also chosen to carry the proof that the network extended beyond the cathedral's walls. He would not consign all evidence to a bargain that left the mechanism intact. He knew that by keeping one physical fragment, he invited a long road of inquiry and risk. He made that choice by action. He carried the sliver away rather than signing it over to those who would bury it. At the last, Elias placed the stone sliver on the bench in his workshop and closed his notebook with 3 deliberate taps. He called Henry and said, "We will map the network beyond the city walls. Find the masons who work the buttresses outside the diocese. I suspect others bear the same tooling." Henry's reply was a short affirmative. Magdalene's fate was still uncertain. The chapter would decide on treatment and penance. The magistrate's bargain would hold for now. Elias felt a residue of unease in his bones, but his hands were steady when he reached for the lamp. He had turned suspicion into public record and kept one piece of the instrument to guide further investigation. He would use evidence, procedure, and patience, the tools he trusted, to pursue the network that shaped fear. On the bench, the sliver rested beside his brass pin and the field notebook. He touched the scar above his brow with a fingertip and breathed out. The final concrete beat arrived. He took the sliver, put it into his satchel, and locked the workshop door. He left by the side gate, the satchel thumping against his thigh with each step, and walked into the rain toward the city. His movement closed the chapter's immediate demands and opened a long, deliberate pursuit. He carried a small, undeniable piece of the altar's program with him as proof and as compass. Elias did not promise resolution in words. He showed it in action by stepping into the dark and keeping the evidence close. The night swallowed his silhouette as he crossed the square. Behind him, the chapter prepared statements, and the magistrate polished his ledger. In a lean voice to himself, Elias recited a list of next steps, mason names, archival requests, and a ledger entry for pigment sampled. He did not permit sentiment. He let procedure guide him. The network remained. The altar had proven how image and ritual could become instruments of control. He would meet that instrument with records, witnesses, and public scrutiny. He would not rely on spectacle to change minds. He would change the facts. He closed his eyes for a second and then opened them. The last line of the chapter is action. Elias pockets the sliver of stone and presses the brass pin into his palm. He walks down from the buttress with a cold, deliberate step.